One of the things you write about in your book is that the Academy of Nutrition is behind, supportive, I should say, of a plant-based diet. Is that still the case? And then let's get into the nuances because that word is very vague. What they're for.
Yeah, the entire academy was, I mean, you can read about it in the book. The story of how it came to be is pretty, even our nutrition guidelines, the initial ones came to be, is bizarre, right? And I think, we've seen over the last several years, kind of that movement towards plant-based. I feel like we're starting to see people coming back from it a little bit. But the academy is mostly sponsored by processed foods. I believe they're still sponsored by the soy industry. Um, a few of the other like plant-based drinks. And so, they still heavily proponents of whole grains and, meat alternatives. And they also stand behind saturated fat being bad for you. So yeah, it's bad. I mean, some of their continuing educations are almost embarrassing to read. Like it's outdated science. It's things like saturated fat being bad for your heart or, eating every few hours being good for you. Um hence, when I was a new dietitian, this is like 2009, they were sponsored literally by Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Soy Joy, and I was like, this is ridiculous. Even before I understood low carb nutrition, I'm like, you can't be sponsored by something and not they have this really bizarre statement. I'll see if I can find it for you online about their sponsorship. It says like our sponsors don't affect our policies or how I'm like, what the hell it does? What do you mean? This is sponsorship is for. You act in a way to represent these things you're sponsored by. Like, well, that's like politics. They give you money. That's why we shouldn't have corporate lobbying, but that's a conversation for another day. Um, Gosh, yeah, it's so frustrating. I think it was 2014 that the New York Times published an article that the Academy was literally taking funds. So, they get funds obviously from people with their yearly fees, which I don't do. You don't have to do. And they were investing in Coca-Cola. And they said, "Oh, that's, once again, oh, that doesn't affect our policy or whatever." It's like you're supposed to be representing all dietitians and you're taking our funds and putting it in Coca-Cola. Like, I don't know, maybe you say that's smart investing and they're making money, but to me, that's a huge conflict of interest. Because don't you want Coca-Cola to do well if you're investing in Coca-Cola? Like, oh my gosh, it just makes me like, ugh, it just feels icky. It just feels so slimy. It feels like everything as nutrition professionals we should be advocating against. We know these foods are bad. We know they're destructive to human health. We know that non-fatty alcoholic liver disease has increased exponentially with the increase of these sugar sweet beverages. Yet here we are investing in them? Get out of here.
It's crazy. And one of the things preparing for this, I've heard you talk about, and it really clicked for me, is the fact that it's not going to get dietitians saying, okay, Coke is something we recommend, or pushing it upon their clients. It's the middle ground where when people ask about it, the dietitian could say, okay, in moderation. Talk more to that.
So it's so brilliant, I just see these because I never, I practiced in the clinic until 2019. I think I left or in 2020 is when I actually left. And I never saw a dietitian go into a room, and I witnessed heart disease education, diabetes, you name it. I witnessed it and gave it. It never like in a handout we said it never said like drink soda, drink Pepsi. But if a patient asked, like, hey, I like Pepsi, what do you think about that? It was, oh, we'll just have it in moderation. Because if you're just taught moderation, then oh, we don't want to restrict people. We don't want to, it makes everything so arbitrary because moderation has no definition. When I think of moderation, I think of like, oh, I don't know, once or twice a week. Somebody might think like, oh, that's once a day. Someone might think that's once a year. Someone might think that's 3 times a day instead of drinking it all day. But in reality, when you say moderation, there's two problems with that. One is the first problem I just talked about is it's completely arbitrary. It has no definition. The second one is it would be like telling someone to moderate, cigarettes. It's addictive. We have tons of research that nicotine is, cigarettes are addictive. So it's like telling someone to moderate foods that are literally designed to be addictive. It's like, here they are getting permission to eat these, but now they can't stop eating these because they change our brain chemistry. Yeah, it's horrible. But once again, it's such a whacked out system to where These processed foods are sponsoring the academy. So the academy is telling people it's okay to eat these processed foods, you know?
Not to mention, we're in this position now where over 90% of people are metabolically unhealthy, and we've been living this radical lifestyle and eating this radical diet in moderation just isn't going to get us back to where we need to be.
No, and I mean that's one of my like taglines is we're not going to medicate or moderate out of this. Like there's you absolutely cannot. You have to say like I am willing to be radically different. And radically different, unfortunately, it should just be like I'm willing to live and be a normal human and eat real food. But it's so unusual to eat 2 to 3 times a day eating low carb real food. Like that is incredibly unusual. Um and it shouldn't be. It should be the norm. It should be like, "Hey, we eat 2 to 3 times a day." If you're metabolically healthy, you incorporate some seasonal whole carbs. If you're not, you just really focus on proteins and fats. But yeah, it's a mess. It's a big mess, and you see it even starting young. Like, I get upset, my non-existent children are perfect. Always say that. Because Korean, I don't have kids. But man, sometimes I see kids. I visited my sister. I have 3 older sisters. My next oldest sister lives in California, and so, right outside of Anaheim. So I was staying, Anaheim is where Disneyland or whatever is. And so I was running in the morning, and I'm like, "My god, like, is that it was like hard-boiled eggs with legs. What are these kids? Not just, like, chubby, but, like, obese." I mean, these kids are, like, 5 or 7 years old. Like, that breaks my heart. That's not their fault.
And to piggyback off this moderation piece, to me, we got to talk about fruit because a lot of the fruit has been hybridized and it's just so sweet. I think a lot of times people can wrap their heads around white sugar, processed foods. But if you're in that position of these kids that you're talking about, or somebody metabolically unhealthy, you likely need to cut the fruit out or at least drastically bring it down because you're in a position again that is so critical and so far down the continuum that you need to be radical to get back.
I love that you said that, and I appreciate that because this is where the confusion comes in. I see people arguing on Twitter, like, "Oh, fruit isn't bad for you. Nobody got diabetes from eating fruit." And if you're saying somebody's been eating chicken and salad and, walking a few miles a day and having a banana, then no, they're fine. That's no big deal. But if you are already metabolically sick, and I'll give you an example. I, People I work with at ONA, somebody whose blood glucose is 250 normally. Once again, we'll just say 250 waking. Normal should be under 100. If they eat an orange, their blood sugar is going to go to like over 300. Are we saying that oranges are inherently bad and nobody should ever eat an orange or they're going to spontaneously combust? No, we're not saying that. But we're saying, like you said, when you're so far down the continuum, you have to be drastic. In my experience, it behooves you to be drastic, to say, like, I can't have things. Because once again, your body is completely saturated with glucose. So you need to reduce or completely get rid of the glucose. And that's a huge confusion with type 2 diabetics. If you're a type 2 diabetic, there's no room at the end. That means, no carbohydrates. Once again, I in the my book, I use the hoarder's house. Like there's nothing left. Don't bring anything else in. You need to get some of the stuff out by moving around and by reducing your carbohydrates so the body can burn some of it. So yes, fruit. I am, I just for whatever reason, I'm not a huge fruit person. I like some seasonal berries. I certainly can supplement my running diet with fruit. I think for young, I've got and my nephew's 16, he plays soccer, he eats a bunch of fruit. That's fine. He's a young, healthy boy. But just thinking that people who are metabolically unhealthy should be eating a shit ton of fruit is a bad idea. Because yeah, it's very high in sugar. Can you eat fruit at some point once you reverse your, metabolic health? Most likely. But we have to take in account where we're at right now. That's why I would encourage anybody, like, you have to be careful listening to this person or that person, even me. Do your own research. But if you're very sick, you need to be focusing on what does your body need. If your body has extremely high glucose, your body doesn't need more glucose and it doesn't matter if it's from an orange or from a Snickers bar. Your body doesn't know. It breaks down to the same thing.
I think another good thing in that realm to talk about when it comes to plants is the anti-nutrients. So we have the sugar, specifically in fruit, but then the other challenge is things like phytates, oxalates, lectins. Depending on the plant, you get the double whammy of the anti-nutrients as well.
That was my, like, kind of extreme, like, worry with people going on these very, plant-based diets, especially, like, women and young women eating a lot of rice, eating a lot of quinoa, eating a lot of salads, eating a lot of things that have a lot of fiber, but also have a lot of phytic acid, which combines, they form covalent bonds with calcium and iron. And those tend to be two things that are relatively low in the human diet. And so, once again, does that mean if you're a metabolically healthy person, you should never eat anything with phytic acid? Of course not. But that has become a very big part of our diet, these grains and nuts and seeds. And then we're not having a lot of the meats and, fish and some of the, healthier fats like avocados. And so when you do that, you potentially cause problems that we see. People have a lot of issues with, we see more people with bone issues at young age, people that have a lot of issues with your teeth. Your teeth are bone. So you're having a lot of cavities and other things. You probably need less phytic acid, probably more saturated fat, more minerals. Um, yeah. And so it's just we kind of have the emphasis, in my opinion, reversed. Like we put this like as much plants as possible and a little meat, where I feel like we need to have much more meat and much more fat, and then use plants to, as a supplement to your goals, to your metabolic health. Um, and yeah, I know there's some people that would disagree and say like, "Oh, I eat all these plants and I'm perfectly healthy." Great. I'm glad. I'm glad, but that is not my overwhelming experience.
When it comes to phytic acid, is it binding to nutrients just within the food that has the phytic acid? Or if you're eating a mixed diet and you're getting some good quality animal nutrition, is that going to affect the meat as well?
Yeah, like if you're, let's say, eating something like just grains, even with, we see this a lot with, even with iron, they say don't take a lot of like tannins or don't have, some of those things. I'm trying to think of what other good example, like teas and coffees and stuff. You want to try to have that separate from what you're eating. And that doesn't mean like, let's say you have a cup of coffee with something high in iron, is if you're not going to completely absorb any of it, but it is going to bind to some of that. So yeah, it's I just get so frustrated with the once again, a lot of people don't even know that. They think like I just need to eat. And I'm not saying once again the fiber is bad for you or that you should completely eliminate phytic acid, but just being aware. You need to see like where is my health right now? Like where are my goals? And that's another thing that if you are feeling super fatigued and you get a lab panel, I always encourage women too to get your iron checked, get your ferritin checked. That's something we often see is very low in women. So, and if your ferritin is very low, you really need to consider, increasing your red meats or even potentially taking a supplement depending on how low it is.
As you talk about iron and red meat, this is a good place to talk about bioavailability. And this is something you're big on, the fact that just because on a nutrition label we see a certain amount of something, when it comes to plants, those aren't always what you're going to end up absorbing.
Yeah, bioavailability is something. What is bioavailability? I mean, like you said, it just means what can we actually absorb? And I love, I will continue to use this analogy because I love the fact that, like, if I wrote you a check and say, Jesse, it was really nice to chat with you. Here's a check for $1,000. And you're like, whoa, this is amazing. And you take it to your bank and they're like, this girl's got $17 in her bank account. And you're like, oh man, that's BS. It doesn't matter that I wrote it to you for $1,000. It matters, can you actually access the funds? And that's what bioavailability is. It doesn't matter that spinach has, let's just say, 3 milligrams of iron. Your body cannot access it and break it down. It is not very bioavailable, right? And so it's effectively useless to you, just like, unless they give you the $17, most of that $1,000 is useless to you. So you want to have things that have high bioavailability. And those tend to be things that are like lower in fiber and anti-nutrients, which obviously protein is, and a lot of the, fats, like some of the like fats, DHA, EPA, things that are high in fish, or even like, saturated fats that are in beef, they're going to be higher in, or they're going to help your body absorb those fat soluble vitamins, D, E, A, and K. So yeah, a lot of things in plants are just not very bioavailable. And the fact that they're not very bioavailable, meaning the human body can't use them very well. Once again, doesn't mean you can't ever eat plants, but to me, that means you should probably not depend on them as your sole source of nutrition.
You touched on fiber. Let's bring that in, a controversial topic.
Yeah.
Somebody eating the way you've been describing, generally they're going to really cut down on their fiber. If they're worried about pooping, their microbiome, bring fiber in and talk about how you think about it.
Yeah, no, the opinion on fiber's changed a little bit. I used to be like, hey, nobody uses fiber ever. Who cares? It causes all these problems because I saw people get supplemented with fiber, especially in the ICU. And it's not. I mean, if anything, it's like, hey, I'm having severe diarrhea. They get, these the Benefiber packets, and it almost never helped. And, when I first started carnivore, low carb, and then ketogenic diets, very minimal fiber. It felt great, had no issues. You have to make sure you're getting the fat. Over time, I think it makes sense to incorporate some type of fiber because just like nobody was ever a pure carnivore throughout time. We eat some grasses and roots and whatever during famine, you know, and nobody was ever purely plants. Nobody was ever purely meat. So I do think having some fiber can be beneficial potentially at points for microbiome. But yeah, in general, I think we kind of overblow, fiber being this like be all end all helping everything because once again, super high fiber diets, you're going to potentially bind to some vitamins and minerals. So I would say for most people, it makes sense, especially if you're doing a lower carb diet, just enjoy some of the fiber or you're getting fibers from, avocados are very dense in fiber. You're going to get them from any type of vegetables you have. But I don't necessarily think that, going out of your way to have a massive amount of fiber is really important.
Okay, let's pivot off fiber into the microbiome as a whole. And your thoughts on fermented foods, probiotics, short chain fatty acids. Share your thoughts in that realm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like Mary Reddick is probably a better person to talk to about this. But I do think, I feel like if anybody tells you, like, this is how to eat for the perfect microbiome, like, you should be like, needing to get out of here because nobody knows. Your microbiome definitely reflects like things you've eaten. So, whatever region of the world you're in, people eating different diets, their microbiomes are going to be very reflective of what they're eating, and they did do some studies on like, low carb ketogenic diets and they had the same alpha diversity as somebody eating, a higher um, fiber, kind of more of the traditional diet. So, but yeah, I mean, we know that people have fermented things throughout history, as far as like yogurts, kefirs, the carbohydrate, one of the main ones I eat, sourdough is fermented. I think there's something to that. I certainly think, when you have, fibers, you're going to have some of those short chain fatty acids, and that seems to be beneficial. But yeah, I don't know if it's just taking random probiotics. I wouldn't do that. I don't do that. But I do think if you're going to be eating, I do think it makes sense to have some cultured products just because, that does, create some more diversity.
All right, last question for today. As we wrap up, somebody who has stuck with us throughout the almost 2 hours here, they're
Yay.
ready to take the plunge, drop the carbs. Let's give them the really high level playbook of how they walk out of this.
Okay, cool. So you never want to feel deprived or hungry. I remember when I first started this, it kind of scared me how much meat I could eat. Allow yourself just to eat to be satiated. I would focus 2 to 3 times a day, ruminant animals, like I said, beef, lamb, adding butter. If you like non-starchy vegetables, I think those are fine to add in as well. Drink a lot of water, take some electrolytes. Get online. You can Amazon, Google keto electrolytes. Consider the drink Unamate. I have a link if people are interested in that to learn a little bit more about what that's about, or that's on my website. Uh, yeah, it's really basic. 3 times a day, protein, ideally animal protein, a non-starchy vegetable if you want. Add a little bit of fat, whether that's butter, coconut oil, some avocado. I always say too, try to sit when you eat. Chill out a little bit. That helps. Um, and repeat. Give yourself a full 30 days. I think people, you don't like it after a day or 2 days. Commit to yourself. Say, I'm going to do this. And so when your friends are like, hey, we're eating pizza, say, okay, I'll come hang out, but I'm actually eating this way, you know?
And for somebody needing that hope piece, like we talked about early in the conversation, They've been knocked down by a lot of different diets over the years, a lot of different advice. They feel like the best they can do is just hold where they're at. What would you say to them?
Once again, your body and your brain have such a tremendous capacity to heal. And if you're somebody who just you're going through it or you're struggling, maybe it's better for you to do like a step down approach. Like, let's say you're just eating like absolute garbage right now and you even know it. Okay, well, you know what? How about for the next week, we just drink water instead of soda? And then after that, instead of, and you can work with somebody that can help you really step this down. But there's nobody listening to this that is too far gone because you have your brain is functioning, you have the capacity to listen to this. And also just connect with somebody, connect with me, connect with another ketogenic dietitian out there, commit. And you will be blown away. You can be a completely different person in 6 months. You can change your entire life in as little as 3 months.
Since you made it to the end of this clip, I know you're going to love the full episode. Click here to watch. I'll see you over there.
We are not going to medicate or moderate out of this. We have great data, tons of clinical published trials on people reversing type 2 diabetes with lower carbohydrate diets. But if you're very sick, you need to be focusing on what does your body need.